Hey everybody, and welcome back. And if you hear a little noise in the background going on this morning, it is the air conditioning running to try and keep this place cooled down because it is another warm day down here in Texas. We're supposed to crest a little over 100 degrees again. So let's dig right into another upgrade, and it's one that I'm kind of excited about a little bit. I'm impressed. I'm impressed with this stuff. The speaker that we're looking at here is again from a company called Monoprice, and this is one of their monolith series. This is the 465T, and there's also a 460T, which is apparently the same speaker without the upfiring THX type or Dolby Atmos height speaker built into it. This one has it built in. And the first thing I'm going to do is going to kind of go over some of the things that I went over with the center channel version that we've already done a video on. A lot of the same things still apply to this one, and we're going to go over that and talk about the speaker itself, and then we're going to dig into the measurements and what it did and how it measured and all that kind of stuff. So first of all, let's look at this thing. It's a nice looking tower. It's a tall tower. It's got 4 woofers and then this mid tweeter pod. It's the same woofers that are used in the center channel speaker. Now the cabinet is braced, but it's kind of lightly braced. It definitely, it's built to a price point. You know, it's not this thick. It's pretty thin, and it can really use some no-res. But the coating, whatever they're rolling across this thing all the way around, and I think they're seaming it here in the back. It looks nice. It really does. It looks nice. Again, the woofers, it's a paper-based cone, which I like. And it's got either a coating on it or it's bonded with some type of a poly-type coating or something like that. And it's very heavy. It's a stiff, heavy cone, which is good for low-frequency duty. It's not good when you're having to play all the way up to a tweeter. You know, when you have a woofer this size, sometimes it's more ideal to give up stiffness to gain some low end extension and some control down low to gain some speed up top. In other words, lighter moving mass, faster settling times. This one, heavy moving mass. However, it doesn't have to play that high because of the tweeter mid pod that this thing is crossing to. The mid plays fairly low, so it's not having to go way up above 1,000 hertz. So in this case, the heavier, stiffer cone, not a bad trade-off. And it does play fairly low. We've done some test tones through it there in the shop. And the tuning frequency, if you have the port unplugged, comes with a phone plug, is tuned fairly low. So a lot of good things going on about this thing. Crossover-wise, it's another one that's built to a price point. I mean, it's kind of cheesy. However, they did use poly caps and a little air core inductor, actually 2 air core inductors, in the tweeter mid circuit. And then a lot of these bigger inductors, they went with little iron core inductors and electrolytic capacitors and sandcast resistors and stuff. The stuff that won't cost anything. Bonding posts on the back, there's 2 sets. There's one set for what's called the height speaker, which is up in the top. That's something when you're using your Dolby Atmos, you're going to send it a completely different signal than the rest of the speaker. So you plug that one in here, and the lower bonding posts are for the rest of the speakers. And yes, they did put, the steel nuts on these things, which, a lot of budget companies do that. It's a lot cheaper to do. They're saving pennies, but add a few cents to this thing. Put some brass nuts on the back. Use some copper bonding posts. I mean, there's definitely some upgrade potential still there. So let's get into the measurements on these things. Now, first of all, we did measure the height speaker that's built into the top of it, and it does have some issues. There's a peak in the response. It's the same little setup that's used in the little shorty that's a little stand-mounted version. And like I said, it's got issues, but it's facing up. So a lot of those issues are not problems. It's just creating a ambient sound, an airy, here's, an effect. It's all it's really doing. So I'm not too freaked out that that thing's rough. And the customer that sent these to us said basically he's going to disconnect these anyway. He doesn't care. So we don't have to fool with any of that at all. He wanted us to look at the rest of the speaker. And how did it actually measure? Well, surprisingly, very well. Just like the little smaller model that was just kind of the stand mount that we measured. This one also measures really well. And I've looked at the crossover. We've measured all the parts. We've drawn a schematic for it so you can replicate everything using higher quality parts. And it's kind of a relief to me when something comes in and I look at it and think, I don't have to do any work. I don't have to redesign the whole thing and fix problems and things like that. It measures pretty well. Let's look at the on-axis frequency response. It's fairly smooth all the way across. The top end is tilted down just a little bit. That's the way they voiced it. And I want to say that is a voicing decision. That's not the same as when we get speakers come in and the tweeter's 4 dB louder than the rest of the speaker clips, or there's big holes in the response because drivers are out of phase, or there's woofer breakup and there's ringing up in the top of the woofer's range and there's resonances. Usually that's what we're faced with. That's when we have to go in and design filters that correct all that stuff and balance the response out. And, you know, even just amplitude problems where there's peaks and dips in ways that are sharp. It's not a voicing thing. It's not voiced that way when all those problems exist. Those are usually just bad engineering. And in this case, the engineering was really good. This is just a voicing thing where they wanted the top end tilted down a little bit. It's kind of like the ATCs. You can leave it that way if you want, if you do the upgrade on this thing, or you could adjust the resistor on the tweeter level just a hair, and you could bring it up just a hair and kind of make it more of a balanced sound. It's up to you guys. But overall, they did a really good job with this. Whoever's doing the design work for this product line, whoever they've hired, thank you for doing a good job so I don't have to go in and fix a bunch of errors and problems and everything else. So great job to who's ever doing the Monolith series. Now, looking at horizontal off-axis, the horizontal off-axis looks great, drops off very evenly, and the vertical off-axis looks great. And one of the reasons vertical off-axis looks so good is the very close acoustic center, center to center of the tweeter in the mid, very close together. So as you go up or down, you're not changing drastically the time arrival between these two drivers. Versus, let's say if we had a tweeter and it was mounted this far from the woofer and it's crossed at 2500 or 3000 hertz, as you start moving up or down, the time arrival between the two are changing pretty drastically, and at the wavelengths where they're crossing, it causes them to be out of phase and causes big holes and things like that. We don't have that with this speaker because the close acoustic centers, movement is not causing a big change in time arrival. And it's crossing, the mid's crossing fairly low to the woofer. So what we see when we go up and down vertically is a very consistent response. So a very good, even response throughout the whole room. Looks great in that regard. Looking at the impedance curve, it does dip to 3.7 ohms. And you can tell what the impedance looks like with the port plugged or without the port plugged. There at the very end, you can see a little hump there that's created when the port is not plugged. So it is a fairly low impedance load down low. We're below 4 ohms. And they did something to try and keep that impedance up a little bit that I don't really like. And what they did was they took the outer woofers, which are playing a little different range than the inner woofers. The inner woofers are crossing to the mid, and the outer woofers are playing just lower frequency ranges only, which is a great idea. However, to drop the output levels on the outer woofers, they put a 1 ohm resistor in line with the woofers. Now what happens when you put a resistor in line with the woofer is that in the lowest frequency range, your power handling is limited to the rated power of that resistor. In other words, in this case, thankfully, they used at least a 25 watt rated resistor. So That's saying is, if you sent a 20 or 30 hertz test note through this thing and left it on and brought the power level above 25 watts, that resistor will probably burn up, because that's all it's rated to dissipate, and it will get hot, and it may not last very long if you're playing a lot of low bass through this at heavy constant levels. That's the way they went about trying to fix the impedance issue, and in my opinion, that's not the best way to go about it. You could have increased the impedance of the drivers, and that way you still had good power handling and you would have had a higher impedance, but that's not the way they went about it. When we designed the parts package for this thing, what we did was we replaced that 1 ohm resistor with 4 ohm resistors to bring that power handling up quite a bit, almost double the power handling, so that you could beat on it a little longer without burning that stuff up. And hopefully in the application you guys are using it, and you're not playing that much really bottom heavy music at a sustained constant level for that long. Peaks are okay, an instantaneous peak, the resistor can dissipate that kind of heat, but on a constant level it's not going to. Also, let's look at the spectral decay. Spectral decay on this whole thing looks really clean. Down in the lowest frequency range, you can see it's taken these little woofers a little longer to dissipate a lot of that stored energy, and some of that has to do with just how heavy the moving mass is. But overall, the thing measured really clean, and so I was just really happy and really impressed with the overall design. It's built to a price point, just like a lot of the speakers out there. And anytime you see speakers at this price point, keep in mind they had to build the pair of speakers that whatever the price of that is, they had to completely build it for between 1/5 and 1/4 of the total retail cost. And it depends if it's sold through a dealer network or something. Usually they had to build it for 1/5 of that price. If it's a direct sale thing where they're selling them online and not through a dealer, they may have spent as much as 25% of the retail price to build each of these, to build the pair. So you got to expect they're not going to have much money's left to spend on the crossover parts. That's just what we see every day, all the time, at all these budget price points. That's just a simple fact of economics. So if they used really high-end parts in this thing and really cranked out, made this a really high-end speaker, just by upping the parts quality and putting $400 worth of really high-end caps and cools and resistors and things like that into this thing, that $400, as you know, I could raise the price $1,600, $2,000 more on the retail end. So you can understand why they don't put this high level of parts into this thing to begin with. However, as a hobbyist on your own, you can buy those high quality parts and you can do it yourself for a lot less money. Now, this crossover is fairly complex. There's quite a few parts on here, so just replacing it with good quality parts is going to cost a little bit, but we tried to pick parts that we felt like would take this thing to a much higher level without getting crazy. We're not going to put dueling caps and stuff like that into a speaker at this price point. It doesn't make any sense. So we're trying to figure out the best place to put the money in the highest quality parts that are the best parts for the money, so that you get the best out of this. So we've put together a little package. It's going to replace one set of these with some tube connectors, which is going to improve the clarity across the board. All new wiring, and we'll get rid of this stuff. This had push-on connectors with thin PVC jacketed wire. Get rid of all of that. We'll provide for you new wiring, sheets of no-res that you can go through and tighten up this cabinet. So that'll tighten up the bass response. That'll clean up the vocal region. That'll do away with the cabinet resonance issues. And so we'll put a whole package of this thing together and have it there on our website. You guys who are buying these things can just click and order, and we'll get a total for everything just as soon as we can, and we'll have it up probably before the video launches. So that's it for this one. And we've got a center channel still to do. It also has this pod with a woofer on either side of it. I expect it may measure really well also. So that's coming. And again, kudos to whoever did the design work for this company. You did a pretty good job on that. So We'll see you guys in the next one.